At the dawn of the 31st millennium, the galaxy was a broken, fragmented place. Mankind, once united in a golden age of progress, had been shattered by war rebellion and the sinister influence of Xenos. The fall of human civilization, known as the Age of Strife, had plunged the species into darkness. Warp storms raged across the stars, cutting off human worlds from one another, leaving many isolated and vulnerable. Chaos reigned, with entire planets descending into barbarism or being enslaved by alien conquerors. It was a time of despair, and mankind seemed on the brink of extinction. But from this darkness, a figure emerged, the Emperor of mankind. He had walked among humans for millennia, guiding them in secret, shaping the course of history from behind the scenes. His goal had always been the same: to unite the galaxy under the banner of humanity, to usher in an age of reason, order, and enlightenment. To achieve this, the Emperor revealed himself at the height of humanity's need from the throne. World of Terror, he launched the Great Crusade, a vast military campaign that sought to reunite all human worlds under a single Imperium. The Emperor was no ordinary man. He was a being of immense psychic power, the greatest of all mankind's leaders, scientists and warriors combined. But even with his incredible abilities, he could not conquer the galaxy alone to realize his vision. He created the Legionnaires, artists, superhuman warriors forged from his own genetic material. These warriors, known as Space Marines, were the finest soldiers the galaxy had ever seen, genetically enhanced to be stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human. Each of the 20 Space Marine legions was led by a Primarch, a son created in the Emperor's own image. The Primarchs were more than leaders. They were demigods of war, engineered to be perfect in both mind and body. Each of them represented a different aspect of the Emperor's vision. Some were warriors, others diplomats, scientists, or statesmen. They were not only generals, but symbols of the Emperor's power and legacy. Yet the bond between them was more than that of warriors. They were a brotherhood tied by blood and purpose. The Emperor had forged them, not just to lead his armies, but to share in the dream of a united galaxy. Together they would bring the Emperor's light to the darkest corners of the galaxy. The Great Crusade was a glorious, brutal, and seemingly unstoppable wave of conquest. World after world fell before the might of the Imperium lost. Human colonies were reclaimed. Xenos empires were crushed and ancient technologies were rediscovered. For 2 centuries, the Emperor's armies marched across the stars, and it seemed as though nothing could stand in the way of humanity's ascension. Amidst the galaxy-spanning war, one Primarch rose above all others. Horus Loophole. He was the first of the Primarchs to be found a moment. The Emperor had long awaited when Horus was discovered on the world of Chthoniya. He immediately became the Emperor's closest confidant. From that moment, their bond was deeper than mere father and son. The Emperor saw in Horus the potential for greatness, a leader not only of warriors, but of humanity itself. Under the Emperor's tutelage, Horus grew to be a peerless strategist and tactician. His leadership of the Lunar Wolves Legion became legendary, and his victories piled high. Horus was known for his charisma, a natural-born leader whose presence could inspire his legion and even his brother Primarchs, while other Primarchs had their flaws: anger, pride, cruelty. Horus seemed to embody the best of their father. He was not just a warrior, he was a diplomat, a leader who could bring together the disparate elements of the Imperium and mold them into a cohesive force. He was beloved by his legion, and his name spread throughout the Imperium as the greatest of the Emperor's sons. The pinnacle of Horus's rise came after the victory at Olenor. This campaign was one of the largest and most difficult in the Great Crusade, a test of the Imperium's resolve against a powerful Xenos empire. Horus led the Imperial forces with brilliance, and when Thedas settled, Olenor stood as the greatest triumph of the crusade. To mark this victory, the emperor made a fateful decision. He named Horus the War Master, the supreme commander of all imperial forces. This title elevated Horus above his brothers, giving him authority second only to the emperor himself. The emperor's decision would become one of the most influential choices of the Imperium. Though he didn't know this by appointing Horus as War Master, he was effectively handing over the reins of the Great Crusade. The emperor, for reasons known only to him, chose to withdraw from the front lines of battle. He returned to Terra to focus on a secret project, leaving Horus to lead in his stead. It was an act of immense trust, and in the eyes of many an acknowledgement of Horus's destiny as the emperor's heir for Horus. This was both an honor and a burden. He had always been close to his father, but the title of War Master came with immense responsibility. Now he was their leader, while some like Rogul Dawn and Sanguinius accepted his authority without question. Others such as Logar and Perurbo harbored resentment. Horus was no longer just one of them. He had been set apart, elevated by the emperor's will. The burden of leadership began to weigh heavily on him, and doubts started to creep into his mind. Though Horus's rise seemed like the fulfillment of the emperor's dream, it sowed seeds of division among the Primarchs. The bond of brotherhood that had held the Primarchs together was never as strong as it appeared. Each of them, though united in purpose, was shaped by different experiences and values. Some, like Robert Guilliman, embraced the emperor's vision of an ordered, enlightened Imperium. Others, like Angron and Conrad Kurz, had always harbored darker thoughts shaped by the brutal worlds. They had been raised on even the closest brothers, harbored rivalries and jealousies, though most would never have admitted it. With Horus elevated to War Master, these divisions grew more pronounced. The emperor had placed him in command of the entire Great Crusade, but some of his brothers resented being led. Others felt slighted, wondering why they had not been chosen. Instead, Logar in particular, who had always worshipped the emperor as a god, felt betrayed by Horus's ascension. The cracks in the brotherhood widened, and unseen forces began to exploit them. It was not just the other Primarchs who felt the weight of Horus's new role. Horus himself began to struggle with doubt. The burden of the Great Crusade, combined with the emperor's absence, left him feeling increasingly isolated. He had always been able to turn to his father for guidance, but now the emperor was distant, locked away on Terra, consumed by his own secretive work. Horus's feelings of abandonment grew, and whispers began to reach him. Whispers of another way, a path not of service to the emperor, but of power for himself. These whispers, though subtle at first, would lead Horus down a path from which there was no return. As the Great Crusade pushed forward, the galaxy seemed poised for unification. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The seeds of doubt and jealousy planted among the Primarchs would soon bear bitter fruit. The emperor's favored son would face a choice that would determine the fate of the Imperium. The title of War Master, once a symbol of honor, would become a curse, as Horus was drawn into a conspiracy that would tear the Imperium apart. The galaxy had been united by war. Soon it would be torn asunder by betrayal. In the endless void between worlds, something malevolent stirred for eons. The chaos gods had lurked in the immaterium, unseen and unknowable, waiting for their time. The warp, the realm of emotion and thought made manifest, was their domain, and they were gods of raw emotion. The blood god of war and anger, Zench, the architect of fate, of change and deception. Nurgle, the lord of decay, and Sion, the dark prince of excess and pleasure. The material world was their playground, and for millennia, they had twisted the hearts of mortals to their will, shaping entire civilizations through corruption and deceit. The Great Crusade, threatened there. Dominion, the Emperor, with his vision of a united and rational galaxy, sought to banish the influence of the warp. His imperial truth declared that gods did not exist, that mankind had no need for superstition. To the Chaos gods, this was intolerable. They could not allow the Emperor to succeed. His empire would deny them the very essence of their existence: fear, ambition, hatred, and despair. And so they turned their eyes to his most beloved son, Horus. Lupercal Horus was the linchpin of the emperors. Dream his strength, his loyalty. His very presence was the bedrock upon which the Imperium was built. But within the cracks of Horus's soul, Chaos saw opportunity for all his power and greatness. Horus harbored doubts, fears, and ambitions the Chaos gods whispered into these cracks, seeking to break the favored son of the Emperor. They would use those closest to him, those who had already fallen under their sway, to plant the seeds of betrayal. The word-bearers led by the Primarch Logar had long turned to Chaos, though they hid their treachery. Logar spurned by the Emperor for his religious devotion had sought new gods to worship, and in the dark places of the galaxy he found them. His most trusted lieutenant Erebus had been instrumental in this fall now. Erebus was the knife in the dark, the unseen hand that would tip Horus toward treachery. The stage for this fall was set on Divina, desolate world where Horus would come face to face with the dark powers that sought his soul. The Campaignon. Davin should have been routine. It was a world of little significance, a way station in the path of the Great Crusade. But in the depths of the planet's swamps, Horus would find more than a simple victory. The Danites had fallen under the sway of Chaos. Long before the Imperium's arrival, their primitive religion worshipped the dark powers of the warp. Though they masked it in the guise of gods and spirits, Erebus, seeing his moment, convinced Horus that the planet's uprising needed to be crushed personally, that the War Master himself should lead the assault. The battle was swift, the lunar wolves overwhelming the Donites with ease. But when Horus confronted the rebel leader in the planet's Serpent Lodge, a hidden power revealed itself. Horus was struck, down not by mortal weapons, but by the sorcery of the Lodge. A cursed blade wielded by a Davanite priest plunged into his flesh, and the War Master fell grievously wounded. His body was taken back to his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, but Hismund lingered. On the edge of death, it was Erebus who intervened. At this critical moment, he convinced the Lunar Wolves to bring Horus back to the Serpent Lodge, claiming the priests there had the power to heal the War Master, desperate and with no other options. The Legion complied. Horus was brought back to the Lodge, and there, within the dark heart of Davin's corruption, the Chaos gods made their move as Horus lay unconscious. His mind was plunged into a nightmare. The Chaos gods spoke to him in visions, crafting a world of illusions designed to break him. They showed him a future in which the Emperor ruled not as a benevolent father, but as a tyrant Horusor, a galaxy where the Emperor sat upon a golden throne, distant and uncaring, ruling over a decaying Imperium. The Imperium of mankind, once vibrant and dynamic, had stagnated. Its people lived in fear, its rulers corrupted by power, and its worlds lay in ruin. In this future, the Emperor no longer led humanity. He was locked away on Terra, a god in all but name, worshipped by millions as a distant, unreachable deity. The Great Crusade was over, but its promise was unfulfilled. The Emperor's grand vision had collapsed under its own weight, and the galaxy had become a place of repression, dogma, and endless war. Horus, the Emperor's greatest son, saw himself cast aside, his achievements forgotten. Saw his brothers, once noble and proud, reduced to squabbling warlords. The Chaos gods spoke to him in honeyed words. They told Horus that the Emperor had always planned this future that the Emperor sought. Not the betterment of mankind, but his own ascension to godhood. They twisted the truth, showing him glimpses of the Emperor's secret project on Terra, a work that would see the Emperor rise above even the Primarchs. In this future, the Emperor had abandoned his sons, abandoned the ideals of the Great Crusade, and sought only power for himself in the depths of his soul. Horus raged. He had given everything to the Emperor. He had fought beside him, bled for him, and now he was to be discarded. His loyalty, his love for his father, curdled into bitterness. The Chaos Gods offered him a choice: submit to the Emperor's tyranny, or rise against him. They told him that with their power, he could free humanity from the Emperor's grip. He could usher in a new age where mankind would no longer be slaves to a distant god, but would rule the stars under Horus's command. He would be the master of the galaxy, the true savior of humanity. Erebus, who had guided this dark ritual, appeared within Horus's vision. He spoke of the powers beyond the material world, of gods older than the Emperor. He revealed the truth of chaos, the power that could reshape reality itself. All Horus had to do was embrace it, to accept the gift of the warp, and the galaxy would be his. At the heart of the vision, Horus faced the ultimate temptation. The Chaos Gods offered him everything, power beyond imagination, a future where he would not be a servant, but a ruler. The choice was his, and in that moment, broken by betrayal, fear, and ambition, Horus made his fateful decision. He would betray the Emperor in accepting the powers of chaos. Horus believed he was saving mankind. He convinced himself that the Emperor had failed, that the Imperium would wither under his rule. Only Horus, with the power of the warp, could prevent this grim future. His loyalty to the Emperor, once unshakable, was now twisted into a resolve to overthrow him. Horus did not see himself as a traitor in his mind. He had become the savior of humanity, the one who would prevent the Imperium's decline into tyranny and decay. But in embracing chaos, Horus had not freed himself from the Emperor's control. He had become a puppet to darker forces manipulated by the very gods who sought the downfall of mankind. The War Master was no longer the Emperor's greatest son. He was now the chosen of chaos, and his fall would set the galaxy aflame. Horus's fall was the turning point. The brotherhood of the Primarchs, already strained, would soon shatter. The Lunar Wolves, the proud legion that had followed their War Master Aster into countless battles, would become his instruments of rebellion. The Great Crusade, once a symbol of unity and hope, would descend into civil war as brother turned against brother, and the galaxy was plunged into the dark days of the Horus Heresy. The fall of Horus to chaos did not occur in isolation. The Primarchs, once the Emperor's mighty sons and generals, had always harbored their own doubts, ambitions, and personal grievances with Horus's. Rebellion ignited the Chaos Gods, turned their gaze to other key figures among the Primarchs, whispering promises of power, freedom, or vengeance to those who would listen. The Brotherhood, once the cornerstone of the Imperium, was now fracturing. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's children, had always sought perfection in all things beauty. War, even himself. The Chaos God Slanesh, the Prince of Excess, found fertile ground in Fulgrim's vanity and desire for transcendence. Fulgrim was seduced by the promise of achieving ultimate perfection beyond what the Emperor could offer in secret. He began worshipping / dragging his legion into the same spiral of decadence and depravity. Angron, the butchered and tormented leader of the World Eaters, had been cursed with the Butcher's Nails implants that drove him to madness and uncontrollable rage. Angron's hatred for the Emperor had festered since the day he was forced to leave his enslaved comrades behind on his homeworld Horn. The Blood God sensed Angron's fury and promised him eternal bloodshed a chance to revel in slaughter without restraint. Angron's fall was inevitable, and soon his legion, known for their berserk fury, became Kay's favoured warriors, indulging in their rage without remorse. Mortarion, the grim and day lord of the Death Guard, had always carried bitterness toward the Emperor raised on a deathly poisoned world. He had come to believe that mankind could only survive through sheer endurance. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, preyed upon this belief, offering Mortion the power to save his legion from the ravages of war and death. Nurgle's blessings turned the Death Guard into a plague-ridden force immune to pain and decay, but bound to the horrific will of the plague. God. Finally, there was Logar, the architect of treachery. Logar had always seen the Emperor as a god, and was devastated when the Emperor rejected his worship. This rejection had driven him into the arms of the Chaos gods, whose praises he now sang in place of the Emperor's. It was Logar's word bearers led by Erebus, who first sowed the seeds of heresy in Horus. Now, Logar fully embraced the powers of the warp, becoming a dark apostle of chaos and leading his legion in a crusade of corruption. As Horus gathered his brothers to his cause, the legions Astartes began to split. The once united Space Marine legions now faced an internal schism: loyalists who remained faithful to the Emperor, and traitors who followed their primarchs into damnation. The divide between loyalty and treachery tore through the ranks of the Space Marines. Brother turning on brother legions that had once fought side by side now prepared for war against one another. Horus's rebellion, once hidden in the shadows, was now set to erupt in open warfare. The first open act of betrayal in the Horus Heresy unfolded on the world of Ishvan, a planet that had defied Imperial authority. But the real target was not the rebellious planet, it was the loyalist elements within the traitor legions themselves. Horus, needing to purge those who would not follow him, devised a brutal plan. He feigned a campaign to bring Istvan into compliance, selecting Astartes from the Lunar Wolves, Death Guard Emperor's children and World Eaters, to assault the planet. Many of these warriors remained fiercely loyal to the Emperor, unaware that they had been marked for death. As the loyalist Space Marines landed on Istvan, they were greeted not with the cheers of liberation, but with the harsh reality of their betrayal. Horus, now fully committed to his treachery, unleashed a devastating virus bombing upon the surface of the planet. The atmosphere of Istvan ignited, engulfing the world in firestorms and toxic clouds that killed thousands instantly. The virus bombs were meant to wipe out all life, reducing the loyalist elements within his own legions to ash. Yet a few survived. The loyalist forces, led by Gariel Lone of the Lunar Wolves and Sol Tarvitz of the Emperor's children, fought desperately to hold their ground. Even as Horus's betrayal became clear against all odds, they established makeshift defenses, refusing to die quietly. But the War Arm's plans were merciless. He unleashed the full force of his traitor legions upon the survivors. Angron himself led the World Eaters in a bloody ground assault, cutting down those who had once called him brother. The massacre of Istvan was the first great act of open war in the Horus Heresy. The loyalists who died there were the first victims of a conflict that would engulf the galaxy. Horus had shown his hand. There could be no turning back. The Great Crusade had ended, and in its place, civil war reigned as news of Horus's treachery spread. The Imperium responded. Loyalist legions, still true to the Emperor, rallied to put down the rebellion. Horus, however, moved quickly to solidify his power. He knew that the strongest opposition to his coup would come from the legions that remained loyal, and so he set another trap, even more devastating than the one on Istvan. 3 loyalist legions, the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands, and the Salamanders, led by their respective primarchs. Corvus Corax, Ferris Manis, and Vulcan Maid haste to confront Horus on the blackened world of Istvan. They believed they were going into battle to stop the traitors, but in truth, they were walking into an ambush Horus had already corrupted other Primarchs and their legions, such as Fulgrim's Emperor's Children and Mortarian's Death Guard, and he intended to use this to his advantage. The Loyalist forces launched their assault on the drop site, unaware of the betrayal that awaited them. As they fought their way through the traitor defenses, they found themselves suddenly surrounded the legions that had seemed like allies. The Wordbearers, the Iron Warriors, and the Alpha Legion revealed their true allegiance. In an instant, the Loyalists were caught in a devastating crossfire. The drop site massacre was a slaughter. The Loyalist legions, already battered from their initial assault, were overwhelmed by the treachery of their supposed allies. Ferris Manis, Primarch of the Iron Hands, fought valiantly, but was ultimately cut down by Fulgrim. The brother he had once trusted, the Raven Guard, and Salamanders suffered horrendous losses, their forces decimated by the combined might of the traitor legions. Vulcan thought, lost in the battle, disappeared into the chaos, while Corax barely escaped. With his life, his legion shattered the betrayal. At Istvant was a turning point in the heresy. The Emperor's force had been dealt a catastrophic blow, and Horus now held the advantage with the Loyalist legions. Crippled Horus and his allies were free to continue their march towards Terra. The galaxy, once united under the Emperor's banner, now descended into chaos as world after world fell to the War Master's rebellion. The bonds of brotherhood were well and truly broken, and the Imperium faced the greatest threat in its history. With the Dropside massacre behind him, Horus wasted no time. His legions moved with ruthless efficiency, conquering world after world. The Imperium, already reeling from the blow at Istvan, was now thrown into disarray. The Loyalist legions were scattered. Their strength shattered. The War Master's forces marched toward the heart of the Imperium Terra, where the Emperor awaited, unaware of just how close his favored son had come to bringing the Imperium to ruin. The road to Terra had been paved with blood, betrayal, and corruption. Now the stage was set for the final confrontation between father and son, as the galaxy itself trembled under the weight of Horus's heresy. The Imperium's fate hung in the balance. The Horus Heresy was more than a war of conquest. It was a personal and ideological battle that tore apart the Emperor's most trusted sons. The Primarchs, those once bound by brotherhood, now stood divided between loyalty and treachery, shaping the destiny of the galaxy. Rabut Guilliman, the Lord of Ultramar, stood as a bastion of hope and order for the Imperium as the Primarch of the Ultramarines. Guilliman had long focused on building a realm of stability, discipline, and prosperity, a microcosm of what the Emperor envisioned for humanity when Horus's betrayal became known. Guilliman was shocked but resolute. He threw his strength behind the Loyalist cause, marshalling his immense legion and the resources of Ultramar. But the heresy would prove a devastating test of his will, especially after the Battle of Kaf, where treachery struck his legion at its heart. Guilliman remained loyal, but the weight of the war would lead him to question whether the Imperium could ever truly recover. Even if Horus were defeated, Magnus the Red stood upon the broken earth of Prospero, the world that had once been his sanctuary. Now the fires of betrayal and the roar of battle filled the air. The 1,000 suns his sons fought desperately against. The Space Wolves, who had come under the command of Leman Russ, the Emperor, had ordered Russ to bring Magnus to heel. Though the Wolf King now sought something more destruction, Prospero, once a beacon of knowledge and psychic power, now burned the great libraries of the 1,000 suns filled with millennia of learning, crumbled to ash. The skies once clear and serene now raged with storm clouds. As psychic energies tore at the planet, Magnus watching the ruin unfold. felt the bitter sting of betrayal. He had sought to warn the Emperor of Horus's fall, had reached into the Imperium itself to send a message. Yet in doing so, he had broken the one command the Emperor had given him, never to use his sorcery. Now his father's punishment had come. Russ and his wolves descended with fury. But beneath their savagery lay a sense of duty. Leman Russ, though he despised sorcery, had once considered Magnus a brother. That brotherhood lay shattered now. In a battle of titans, the two Primarchs met in the ruins of Prospero's capital. Tiscarus fought with fury, every strike of his blade filled with the weight of the Emperor's justice. Magnus fought with the power of the warp, his psychic power barely containing the rage and sorrow within him. In the end, it was Russ who struck the final blow, breaking Magnus's body and casting him into the Imperium. Yet Magnus did not, he would not die. Broken, his heart consumed by the realization that the Emperor had forsaken him, Magnus turned to the only power left, to him chaos. The forces of Tinch, god of change and sorcery, reached out too, the fallen Primarch offering him a path to revenge and survival. Magnus accepted, and with that choice, the fate of the Thousand Sons was sealed. However, it was not the Emperor's intention for Russ to kill Magnus or his followers. The Emperor's order was to bring Magnus to him, so that he could answer for disobeying the use of sorcery. Horus, with his newfound powers of chaos, had warped the message to Russ, making the Primarch believe the Emperor wanted Magnus dead, a long way from that bloodshed from Prospero. And in the heart of Ultramar, another treachery unfolded. The Ultramarines, the Emperor's most numerous and disciplined legion, had gathered to prepare for a new crusade. Led by Robert Guillemanthe, were the symbol of imperial order and strength. Yet on the world of Kaf, they would face betrayal at the hands of the word-bearers. A legion once dedicated to spreading the Emperor's truth, now consumed by dark faith, Logar their Primarch had nurtured a festering resentment toward the Emperor. For long years his devotion had been rejected, and Noah sought to bring the galaxy to worship not the Emperor, but the gods of chaos at Kaf. His plan took shape, Gillian had believed. The word-bearers came as allies, but instead they unleashed a storm of destruction with the opening salvo. Kal's skies darkened as orbital bombardments shattered the surface of the planet. Gilman's warriors, caught off guard, fought fiercely to hold. Their ground the battle raged in underground tunnels, and amidst the shattered cities of Kaf, the Ultramarines, though hardened by countless campaigns, had never faced such treachery. The word-bearers, now infused with the power of chaos, fought with a zeal that bordered on madness. Demons manifested from the warp, turning the battlefield into a nightmare. Guilliman Ever, the tactician, rallied his forces. The Ultramarines would not break easily even in the face of betrayal. But the Battle of Kaf was not merely a conflict of arms. It was a blow to Guilliman's sense of order and his belief in the Imperium's unity. The betrayal of the word-bearers cut deep, showing him the true scale of the civil war that Horus had unleashed. Kaf, though devastated, would stand, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Ultramarines had lost brothers' faith and a part of their soul on that world, and the war was only beginning across the galaxy. In the shadowy void of the Thramis sector, a different war unfolded. A war of terror and vengeance. The Night Lords, led by the fearsome and increasingly deranged Conrad Kurz, had descended upon the loyalist forces of the Dark Angels. The Thramis Crusade, as it would come to be known, was a war unlike any other. It was a war of attrition fought across dozens of systems with no clear front line. Conrad Kurz, once a brutal enforcer of imperial law, had now fully embraced the darkness within him. The Night Lords, his legion, followed him into madness, reeing in fear and cruelty. They did not seek victory through Conquest they sorted through, terror planets were raised, and entire systems were left in ruins. The Dark Angels, under the command of their enigmatic Primarch Lion L. Johnson, responded with calculated precision, but they found themselves constantly at odds with the Night Lord's guerrilla tactics. As the war dragged on, Conrad Kurtzmantle's state deteriorated. His visions of doom and his obsession with fate drove him deeper into the abyss of madness. He had always believed that he and his legion were doomed, that their brutal methods would one day be condemned by the Emperor. Now, in the fires of the heresy, that belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Conrad Kurz fought not to win, but to prove the righteousness of his own fall. The Lion, ever the tactician, sought to bring Kursto a decisive battle, but the Night Haunter evaded him at every turn. The Thramis Crusade became a war of shadows, where neither side could gain the upper hand for long. The Dark Angels, disciplined and relentless, pushed the Night Lords back, system by system, but at a terrible cost. Every victory seemed hollow for the Night Lords left, nothing but devastation in their wake in the end. The Thrust Crusade would leave both legions scarred. The Dark Angels, though victorious, were haunted by the brutal tactics they had been forced to adopt to counter the Night Lord's terror. Conrad Kurz, slipping further into madness, fled into the void, his fate intertwined with the shadows he had once sought to master. Thus, the civil war raged on with no end in sight. The Emperor's sons, once united in purpose, now tore the galaxy apart, each driven by their own visions of justice, betrayal, and doom. The Horus Heresy had begun, and the Imperium would never be the same again. Horus, once the Emperor's favoured son, stood at the head of the traitor legions from every corner of the galaxy. The traitor Primarchs and their armies gathered, bound by a singular purpose: to bring the Imperium to its knees. Terror, the cradle of humanity. The seat of the Emperor's power awaited them, its defences formidable but not invincible. The War Master's forces numbered in the millions, legions of corrupted space marines, traitor titans, and countless warp-spawned horrors marched in unison. Leading them were the twisted remnants of once proud legions, the sons of Horus, the World Eatators, the Death Guard, the Emperor's children, and other Zoods who had cast aside their loyalty. Each brought its own madness to the war. Angron's berserkers, bloated with rage Mortarians, plaguing legions spreading disease and decay. Fulgrim's devotees, lost in their pursuit of excess. They converged on terror, guided by Horus's indomitable will and a desire to usurp the Emperor. These traitor legions, united under Horus, had become an unstoppable tide of corruption, death, and ambition, with the galaxy in flames behind them. They now turned their gaze toward the ultimate prize, terror, the seat of the Emperor's power and the heart of the Imperium. This was where Horus planned to end the War Master's forces, bolstered by the dark power of chaos and legions of traitor space marines, advanced relentlessly toward the Sol system. Planet after planet fell, leaving a burning trail of destruction in their wake as the traitor legions gathered their full might. The galaxy trembled. Perebo and the Iron Warriors, masters of siege warfare, prepared to tear down the walls of terror. Angron and the berserk World Eatators thirsted for bloodshed, while Mortarion and the Death Guard carried their plagues and corruption across every world they touched. The Emperor's children, led by the twisted Fulgrim, revelled in their depravity, eager to defile the sacred halls of the Imperial Palace. Even the enigmatic Alfarius and his Alpha Legion operated from the shadows, destabilizing Imperial defenses with sabotage and deception as the traitor legions approached terror, prepared for war. Rogel Dawn, the Emperor's Taurian had been tasked with fortifying the throne world with methodical precision. Dawn oversaw the construction of a defense that would test even the might of the traitor forces' walls were raised gun emplacements positioned, and entire sectors of terror turned into kill zones. The Imperial Palace itself became a fortress, its ancient walls reinforced with layers of adamantium and ceramite, its towers bristling with cannons and void shields. Yet for all his preparations, Dawn knew the grim truth. This would be a war of attrition. The traitors' numbers were overwhelming and, while the Loyalist forces were determined, they were vastly outnumbered. The Imperial fists alongside the remnants of other Loyalist legions stood ready. But the true strength of the Imperial defenders lay in the countless regiments of the Astra-Mitaramand, the ranks of battle-hardened militia. These were not the elite warriors of the Adeptus estates, but they fought with the same unwavering resolve, knowing that, if Terra fell, the Imperium would fall with it. Horus's fleet arrived in the Sol system, tearing through the outer defences in a storm of fire and blood. Mars the Forge world had long since fallen into rebellion. Its once loyal Mechanicum now split between those who still served the Emperor and those who had pledged themselves to the Dark Mechanicum. The traitors used the massive shipyards of Mars to launch wave after wave of warships and landers toward Terroron, the surface of the throne world. The tension mounted as the skies darkened with the incoming storm of traitor forces. The Siege of Terra had begun as the battle for Terra loomed. The Loyalist legions reeled from the mounting losses. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, had been among the first to fall his death, a bitter blow. To the Loyalist cause, Ferrus had fought, with a fury that mirrored the unyielding strength of his legion. But his drive for vengeance had led him into a deadly trap during the drop site massacre on Istvan V. There he'd faced his former brother Fulgrim in single combat. Ferrus, his heart, filled with righteous wrath, believed he could bring Fulgrim back from the brink, that his once noble brother could be saved from the clutches of chaos. But Ferrus had been wrong. Fulgrim now a twisted reflection of the perfection he once sought struck. Down Ferrus, with a blade gifted by the dark gods. The Loyalist Primarch's head had rolled in the dirt, a symbol of the ruin that awaited the Emperor's sons. Thereon hands shattered and leaderless withdrew from Istvan, their grief turning into a cold, unrelenting hatred for the traitors. The death of Ferrus Manus left an indelible mark on the Imperium. His brothers, the remaining loyal Primarchs, felt the loss, deeply for Rogul Dawn. It was a reminder of the fragility of their cause, that even the strongest among them could fall. Vulcan and Cororax, who had also fought on Istvan, mourned the death of their brother, but could not afford to grieve for long. The war continued, and each loss only deepened their resolve, yet the losses did not stop. With Ferrus, as the war drew closer to Terra, Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch of the Blood Angels, carried the weight of a prophecy, one that foretold his death at the hands of Horus Sanguinius, ever the noble and selfless leader, had not spoken of. This vision to his brothers, yet it hung over him like a shadow. His legion, the Blood Angels, fought with unmatched ferocity, their genetic flaw, the black rage, driving them to acts of unparalleled heroism and savagery. But Sanguinius knew that his end was coming, and the burden of that knowledge weighed heavily on his soul. The deaths of Ferrus Manus and the looming doom of Sanguinius were emblematic of the greater tragedy of the Horus Heresy, the Emperor's sons, who had once fought side by side to bring unity to the galaxy, were now tearing it apart. Every death was not just a loss of life, but a loss of hope. A step closer to the end of the dream the Emperor had once envisioned for humanity. Within the Imperial Palace, the Emperor sat upon the Golden Throne, his mind consumed by a war far beyond the material realm. He had withdrawn from the direct command of the Imperium, trusting his sons to carry out the defense of Terra in his place. Malcador, the Sigillite, his most trusted advisor, acted as the steward of the Imperium, but even Malcador, wise and powerful as he was, could feel the weight of the Emperor's absence. The Emperor faced a dilemma unlike any other. He knew that Horus was the key to the heresy that the Wararm Masters' fall had ignited the conflict that now engulfed the galaxy. Yet Horus was not just a traitor. He was the Emperor's son. His most beloved creation. To confront Horus would mean killing him, and that was a burden the Emperor had long hoped to avoid. But the war had grown beyond even his control, and the Emperor knew that the time would come when he would have to face his fallen son in the depths of the Imperial Palace. The Emperor worked on a secret project, the Webway. It was a plan to free humanity from the dangers of warp travel, to create a stable network that would allow the Imperium to move through the galaxy without the risk of chaos corruption. But the project was incomplete, and as the war consumed more and more of his attention, the Emperor realized that the Webway might never be finished. His greatest work would remain a dream unfulfilled. Malcador, ever loyal, saw the cracks beginning to form within the Imperium. The strain of the war, the isolation of the Emperor, and the fracturing loyalty among the remaining legions were pushing the Imperium to the brink. Even among the Loyalists, there were whispers of dissent. Some questioned why the Emperor had withdrawn, why he'd left his sons to fight, while he remained confined to the Golden Throne. Others, like Dawn, understood that the Emperor was focused on matters beyond their comprehension. But the doubt festered nonetheless, as the traitorous forces closed ever closer on Terra. The Emperor's dilemma grew ever more pressing. He knew that the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, but to secure that fate, he might have to sacrifice everything, even the lives of his most loyal sons. The path to Terra was paved with death, and the final reckoning between the Emperor and his fallen son loomed ever closer. The siege of Terra raged like the storm that had gathered over the planet. The traitor legions crashed upon the walls of the Imperial Palace like a relentless tide. Every tower, every trench was a battlefield, and the air itself trembled. Under the weight of war, millions fought and died in the shadow of the Emperor's throne, the defense led by Rogul. Dawn stood firm, but the might of the enemy was overwhelming. Angron, the Red Angel, was the embodiment of destruction. The demon Primarch of the World Eaters tore through Imperial forces with an unholy fury. His berserk rage was boundless. Histwin, chain axes cleaving through ranks of human soldiers and space marines alike. No defense could hold against him. Wherever Angeron went, only ruin followed. Entire battalions of the Imperial Fists and their loyal allies were slaughtered before they could even raise their weapons. Angeron had become a living avatar of Kay's wrath, his bloodlust feeding the madness that had consumed him long ago. Rogul Dawn knew that facing Angeron directly would be suicide. Instead, he deployed every resource he had to slow the Red Angel's advanced gun emplacements. Artillery strikes and even suicide squads of space marines were sent to blunt his rampages. Still, it felt like trying to stop a force of nature. Terra's defenders fell back, bleeding for every inch they surrendered. Dawn himself fought with grim resolve, knowing that each minute bought time for the Emperor's final stand, while Angeron led the brute force of the assault. Pertuabo, the Lord of Iron, guided the strategic genius behind the siege. The Primarch of the Iron Warriors had been planning this moment since the beginning of the heresy. His legion experts in siege warfare were unmatched in the art of breaking defenses. Purabo's siege engines and artillery rained destruction on the palace's walls day. And night weakening the fortress inch by inch, he had devised intricate strategies, coordinating assaults with a precision that left no room for error. The Iron Warriors, emotionless in their purpose, systematically tore down the defenses that had once seemed impregnable. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Loyalists fought with the desperation of those defending not just their lives, but the future of humanity. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, stood alongside the remnants of the Imperial Fist's white scars, and Blood Angels, their golden armor glinted in the fires of battle, a symbol of the Emperor's light. Even as the darkness of chaos closed in around them, every Loyalist soldier knew that if they failed, terror would fall, and the galaxy would be lost to the warp forever. As the siege dragged on, breaches began to form in the outer walls of the Imperial Palace. Parabo's siege lines advanced, and the traitor legions poured through the battle, shifted from the towering walls to the very heart of the palace itself in the Sanctum Imperialis. Rogul Dawn made his final preparations. The war had reached its last phase, and the Emperor would soon face his ultimate challenge above terror. The vengeful spirit, Horus's flagship, loomed like a dark omen. The War Master's eyes, now fully consumed by the malice of chaos, turned toward the planet. He knew that the end was near, that the Emperor would come to him. All the destruction, all the treachery had led to this moment, the final reckoning between father and son, as the traitor legions breached the final defenses of the palace. Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, received a vision of his fate. He had always known this moment would come. With wings of white and armor of gold, he soared toward the vengeful spirit, knowing that his death awaited him. There Sanguinius was the Emperor's angel, the paragon of nobility. But even he could not escape the doom laid before him. He landed on the deck of the vengeful spirit, and there in the shadow of Horus's dark power, he confronted the War Master. Horus stood waiting for him no longer. The brother Sanguinius had once known. Horus was now a vessel of chaos, his form twisted by the dark gods. Yet even in his corruption, a part of Horus remembered the bond he had once shared with Sanguinius. For a brief moment, the War Master hesitated, his gaze flickering with the memory of their brotherhood. But it was only a moment. Horus attacked with the fury of the warp itself. The duel between them was swift and brutal. Sanguinius, though one of the greatest warriors among the Primarchs, was no match for the power. Horus now wielded the War Master, crushed the life from him, breaking his body with a single devastating strike. Sanguinius fell, his noble form shattered at Horus's feet. With the death of Sanguinius, the Emperor felt the tremor in the warp. His most loyal son, the one who had stood beside him since the beginning, was gone. The Emperor could wait no longer, gathered his custodes, Malcador the Sigillite, and a few trusted warriors, and they teleported to the vengeful spirit. The Emperor found Horus in the ship's bridge, standing over the broken body of Sanguinius. The sight of his fallen son brought a wave of sorrow, but there was no time for grief. The Emperor stepped forward, knowing that this confrontation would decide the fate of humanity. Horus, his voice dripping with contempt, called out to the Emperor. The War Master's hubris was boundless. He believed himself invincible, that the dark gods had made him more powerful than even the Emperor. The duel between them began with a clash that sent shockwaves through the Imperium. Horus attacked with all the power of chaos, his blows imbued with the strength of the dark gods themselves. The Emperor, though unmatched in power, hesitated, even as Horus struck again and again. The Emperor could not bring himself to destroy his beloved son. He sought to save Horus, to strip the corruption from him. But Horus, lost to the madness of chaos, saw this hesitation as weakness with a final merciless strike. Horus landed a blow that shattered the Emperor's armor and wounded him grievously as the Emperor lay wounded. Horus prepared to deliver the killing. But in that moment, something changed. The dark gods, sensing the Emperor's death was near, began to withdraw their support from Horus. For the briefest instant, the Wararm Master was himself again free from their influence. He saw what he had become, saw the ruin he had wrought, and in that moment, he knew regret. The Emperor, seizing that moment of clarity, unleashed his full power with a single devastating blow. He obliterated Horus. The War Master's body was reduced tosh, his soul destroyed utterly, leaving nothing for the dark gods to claim. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Emperor, mortally wounded, collapsed. His loyal warriors rushed to his side. But it was clear that even the Master of Mankind could not survive this wound in his final moments. The Emperor gave his last command that he be placed upon the golden throne, where his psychic power would sustain the Imperium and hold back the tides of chaos. The siege of terror was over. Horus was dead, and the traitor legions, leaderless and in disarray, fled into the warp. But the Emperor's dream of a united galaxy had died with him. The Imperium would survive, but it would be a shadow of what it once was, a realm of eternal war, held together by the will of a dying god.